In Chapter 13, Segment 1, Homeostasis maintains a consistent internal environment, the example of thermoregulation, it says that scientists in the 19th century realized that the body can be regulated to provide optimal conditions for cells to live in and grow. Acidity, saltiness, water level, oxygenation, temperature, energy availability, and many other things are regulated by a complicated system of behavioral and physiological mechanisms. Homeostasis is the active regulation of the monitored physical attributes at appropriate levels, resulting in a relatively stable, balanced internal environment. Motivation is the drive that prompts homeostatic behaviors. The mismatch between the actual internal state and the regulated intended state produces a drive to restore the balance. Obligatory losses are unavoidable loss of regulated variables such as energy, water, or temperature as a consequence of life processes. Thermoregulation is the active process of closely regulating body temperature around a set value. In homeostatic systems share several key features. It says that mammals are endotherms. Endotherms are an animal whose body temperature is regulated chiefly by internal metabolic processes. They do this by using metabolism and muscular activity. For example, if the muscles aren't making enough heat, they shiver to make more. Ectotherms are an animal whose body temperature is regulated by and whose heat comes mainly from the environment. An example of this are snakes and bees. Endotherms have advantages over ectotherms. Endotherms range more widely than ectotherms, such as lizards and snakes, that need to stay near sources of warmth. Endotherms have also evolved a greater capacity for oxygen utilization. Mammals can survive high levels of muscular activity for a much longer period of time. Endothermic hairs will always outrun ectothermic torsos. In negative feedback, it says the homeostatic mechanisms that regulate temperature, body fluids, and metabolism are primarily negative feedback systems. Negative feedback is a property by which some of the output of a system feeds back to reduce the effect of input signals. The set point is the point of reference in a feedback system. This triggers a compensatory action of the system. It is called negative feedback because it restores the desired value turnoffs. For example, a thermostat, a temperature drops below the set point, which activates the thermostat, which then turns on the heating system. The heat that is produced has a negative feedback effect on the thermostat, so it stops calling for heat. Set zone is the range of a variable that a feedback system tries to maintain. Most mammals reduce their body temperature during their sleep and can raise it by having a fever to fight off infection. If the body temperature is too hot, proteins begin to lose their correct shape, link together, and malfunction or die. If the body temperature is too cool, chemical reactions of the body occur too slowly, and at very low body temperature, ice crystals may disrupt cellular membranes. In redundancy, it says that bodies have multiple mechanisms for monitoring air stores, conserving remaining supplies, obtaining new resources, and shedding excesses. If function loses in one part of the system, it can usually be compensated by its remaining parts. There is also substantial redundancy in thermoregulatory control systems in the nervous system. The hypothalamus senses and controls body temperature, but lesion experiments show that the different hypothalamic sites control two separate thermoregulatory systems. Lesions in the preoptic area, or POA, impair the responses to cold. Lesions in the lateral hypothalamus of rats abolish behavioral regulation of temperature but did not affect the physiological responses. Homeostatic redundancy has two different systems for regulating the same variable. There is also a hierarchy of thermoregulatory circuits, some located at the spinal level, some centered in the brainstem, and others in the hypothalamus. In behavioral homeostasis, it says that endotherms and ectotherms can employ three kinds of behaviors to regulate temperature. One is change of exposure of the body surface, for example, huddling or extending limbs. Another is change of external insulation, for example, using clothing or nests. And lastly, change of surroundings, for example, moving into the sun, into the shade, or into a burrow. Ectotherms generate little heat through metabolism, so their behavioral needs are more important. Endotherms use internal processes to generate a fever. People try hard to suppress fevers, but they actually help in fighting off infectious diseases. Ectotherms regulate body temperature using specialized behaviors. For example, snakes adjust their coils to expose more or less surface to the sun and keep their internal temperature constant during the day. Endotherms, like mammals and birds, control their exposure to the sun and to hot or cold surfaces to avoid overtaxing their internal regulatory mechanisms. Basic thermoregular system has receptors in the skin, body core, and hypothalamus, which detect temperature and transmit that information to three neural regions, which are the spinal cord, brainstem, and hypothalamus. If the body temperature moves outside the set zone, each of these neural regions can initiate physiological and behavioral responses to return it to the set zone. Many sensors monitor the many internal and external threats to our physiological stability. Simultaneous perturbations at any moment in multiple regulated systems can cause a degree of physiological stress that range from mild and healthy to severe and overwhelming. Allostasis is a coordinated set of behavioral and physiological changes to maintain homeostasis. In fluid regulation, it says that a precise balance of fluids and dissolved salts bathes the cells of the body and enables them to function. Most organisms have evolved homeostatic mechanisms that ensure that the composition of body fluids closely resembles diluted seawater. Minor deviation from this optimal concentration of salt in water is generally lethal, with only a few species having exceptions. One of those exceptions is the salmon, who has unique adaptations that allow it to live in freshwater at hatching, to grow up in saltwater, and to return again to freshwater to spawn. Most of our water is contained within our cells. Intracellular compartment is the fluid space of the body that is contained within cells. The extracellular compartment is the fluid space of the body that exists outside the cells. It is divided between the interstitial fluid and the blood plasma. Water is continually moving back and forth between these compartments, or in and out of cells, by specialized protein channels called aquaporins. Aquaporins are channels spanning the cell membrane that are specialized for conducting water molecules into or out of the cell. Diffusion is a spontaneous spread of molecules of one substance among molecules of another substance, that is, until a uniform concentration is achieved. A membrane that is permeable to some molecules but not others is referred to as selectively permeable or semi-permeable. Osmosis is the passive movement of water molecules from one place to another until a uniform concentration is achieved. Osmotic pressure is the tendency of a solvent to move through a membrane in order to equalize the concentration of solute. Osmolality is the number of solute particles per unit volume of solvent. Isotonic is referring to a solution with a concentration of salt that is the same as that found in interstitial fluid and blood plasma, about 0.9% salt. Hypertonic is referring to a solution with a higher concentration of salt than that found in interstitial fluid and blood plasma, more than about 0.9% salt. Hypotonic is referring to a solution with a lower concentration of salt than that found in interstitial fluid and blood plasma, less than 0.9% salt. Water moves so as to produce uniform saltiness, so cells will lose water if placed in a saltier solution, or gain water in a less salty solution. If excessive, the movement will kill the cell. Extracellular fluid serves as a buffer to maintain proper internal conditions. The nervous system uses two cues to ensure that the extracellular compartment has about the right amount of water and solute to allow cells to absorb or shed water. In two internal cues trigger thirst, it says that the extracellular fluid is an indicator of conditions in the intracellular compartment as well as being a buffer. The nervous system monitors the compartment to see if we need water. Two different states can signal that water is needed. The first is a high extracellular concentration of solute, which is also known as osmotic thirst, or a low extracellular volume due to the loss of bodily fluids, hypovolemic thirst. In osmotic thirst is triggered by increased saltiness of the extracellular fluid. It says that normal physiological processes through which we lose more water than salt, such as in respiration, perspiration, and urination. As a result of increased intracellular saltiness, water is pulled out of the cells through osmosis. Extracellular fluid can become more concentrated by ingestion of a lot of salty foods. Osmotic thirst causes us to seek water to return the extracellular fluid to an isotonic state and protect the intracellular compartment from being dangerously depleted of water. Some hypothalamic cells might be specialized to respond to changes in osmotic pressure. The osmosensory neuron is a specialized neuron that measures the movement of water into and out of cells. They are in several regions of the hypothalamus, including the preoptic area, the anterior hypothalamus, the supraoptic nucleus, and the organum vasculosum of the lamina terminalis, which of one of the circumventricular organs. They are stretchy. Meanwhile, most cells in the body and brain maintain a constant size. They are able to balloon or shrink as the concentration of the extracellular fluid changes. This opens and closes special mechanically gated ion channels that study the membrane, causing changes in cell membrane potentials that track the changes in extracellular concentration. This information is then relayed to other parts of the brain, resulting in thirst or responses to conserve water.